one can question motives or back motives or whatever, but
this clown show that's going on,
it's
Jim Jordan
simple presentation
just
of demeanor
having,
evidence,
as far as I can see,
that is important
one job
to this committee's
to do anything
investigation.
he can to
Inquiry into the potential impeachment of the president.
up and
it should be
lie
accomplished
for
and done forthwith. I'm for it. Let's go.
President of the United States
Mr. Chairman,
of
I yield
America.
back.
He's having a hearing today to into
Gentleman,
Merrick Garland for reasons best. They're all over the place, scrambling and just.
Chairman, I have an amendment to the desk.
Anyway, we have Jerry Nadler and Adam Schiff coming up for you next, and I'd love to know your thoughts. Just on it. It's costing a lot of money, by the way. What do you watching
Point of order
this?
reserved by the gentleman from California. The gentleman is recognized to explain his amendment.
Let me know,
Thank you,
please.
Mr. Chairman.
Comment section
Mr.
now.
Chairman, Attorney General wrote, the Justice Department has a vested interest in protecting, quote, materials related to a closed criminal investigation where disclosure is likely to damage future law enforcement efforts, close quote, which is the case here. The Attorney General further explains that producing the audio recordings to the committees would raise an unacceptable risk of undermining the department's ability to conduct similar high-profile criminal investigations, in particular investigations where the voluntary cooperation of White House officials is exceedingly important. The White House also wrote to the committees to explain that the President's exertion of executive privileges is based on his, quote, long-standing commitment to protecting the integrity, effectiveness, and independence of the Department of Justice and its law enforcement investigations. Chairman Jordan claims he needs these recordings to understand things like tone or pauses. This is absurd, and the chairman has made no attempt to explain his reasoning. His claim in no way overcomes the executive branch's substantial interest in protecting sensitive law enforcement investigations. What high-profile witness would ever voluntarily cooperate with a law enforcement investigation if they knew that audio files of their conversations would be released to committees who are seeking those files for purely political purposes? This amendment simply ensures the report is complete and up to date. I urge my colleagues to support the amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California withdraws his point of order. The gentleman from North Dakota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to speak in opposition to the amendment. They don't get to choose. They don't get to choose. We spend a lot of time in this hearing, in this room, talking about, I've been an advocate for recording interviews, recording arrests, doing all of this. There's a pretty known legal precedent and legal rule of the best evidence rule, and it exists everywhere. The person providing the evidence doesn't get to choose the manner and form in which the evidence is provided. And this also happens to be a pattern. 5 minutes before the Her hearing, we got the transcript. 5 minutes before this hearing, we get the invocation of executive privilege. There's a difference between a transcript and a video and audio. And I don't possibly understand the argument of, we'll release the transcript, but we won't release the tapes. And that's going to determine whether or not somebody participates in an investigation, which, by the way, that can be compelled to be done as well. The argument that this is somehow anything other than the DOJ trying to pick and choose which pieces of evidence or which parts of evidence or what they determine is the best evidence to our committee is just, quite frankly, not based in any precedent with under law. I spent 10 years doing this. I spent 10 years doing discovery requests. I never asked for permission. I'm entitled to what it is. They don't get to determine what we get. That is not how the system works. And it can't be how the system works, because otherwise the people who you are trying to conduct oversight on determine what information you get to conduct that oversight. That is just simply not how the separation of powers is set up. It's not set up in how any legal investigation in any jurisdiction in any form exists anywhere in the country. The audio tape exists. That is the best evidence in which to conduct oversight, and this committee is entitled to it. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? The gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In support of the amendment. But first, I want to talk about both what this committee and what this Congress is doing to the rule of law. Earlier this week, we witnessed the spectacle of the highest ranking Republican in the country, the Speaker of the House, someone in line for the presidency, standing outside a Manhattan courthouse in a hush money payment to a porn star trial, vouching for the good moral character of the defendant. Now, I would imagine if you asked a younger Mike Johnson some 10 or 15 years ago, could you ever imagine you would stand outside of a courthouse in a hush money payment to a porn star trial and vouch for the moral character of the defendant? He would never imagine that possible. But like the proverbial frog in the boiling pot, what we have seen, not just with this speaker, but with so many of the Republican leadership over the last several years, is one surrender of moral authority after another surrender, one betrayal of what one once stood for, followed by another betrayal, followed by another, until you find yourself standing outside of a Manhattan courthouse, vouching for the moral authority and character of someone who possesses none. And not just losing yourself and losing any sense of right and wrong in the process, but here denigrating the very institution of justice, making the false claims, the patently false claims that this trial in Manhattan was somehow about keeping Donald Trump off the campaign trail, something the speaker knows is patently false, but willing to repeat. And this is where we are, where our highest ranking official, Republican official, is essentially telling the American people, don't trust our system of justice. Don't trust the rule of law. And here in this committee, we see something very similar. We see a Republican U.S. attorney brought on to investigate the president. We see him make a report to this Congress that there is nothing prosecutable in what he was able to find. We see him at the same time failing to make a prosecutable case, deciding the next best thing he can do is lob a political grenade in his report and politically belittle the president. And we see this committee unable, after months and months and millions of dollars to make any kind of an impeachable case, decide to follow Mr. Hur's tainted example. We can't make a case for any impeachment. There is no high crime. There is no misdemeanor even. And so we will do the next best thing, and we will use this to political advantage by subpoenaing tapes of an interview we already have the transcript for. And why? Because the Republicans in this committee have moved from being the criminal defense firm for the president to being essentially an adjunct of the president's media advertising firm. They want the video for Donald Trump's campaign commercials. That's where this committee has become, the committee on the judiciary, the committee that is centered or supposed to be centered on the rule of law and on justice. And what are we doing? We're holding the Attorney General of the United States in contempt. And for what? Because he won't give video material for a campaign commercial to this committee on behalf of a president who is a criminal defendant in a hush money payment to a porn star case in New York, the first of many criminal trials that he will face. This is where we are. This is where we are. You know, I first joined this committee, now it's been over 20 years ago. And I suppose like a young Mike Johnson, I could have never imagined this committee would engage in such a thing. It's not as if 20 years ago this committee was some bastion of bipartisan comity. It wasn't. We might and did disagree on abortion and on guns and on the whole host of other policy issues. But I don't think any Democrat or Republican on this committee would have ever imagined it would be brought so low as to hold an attorney general in contempt because it can't get a video for a campaign commercial when it was already given the transcript. But this is where we are. And I think just day after day, moment after moment, year after year, we lose sight of how far we have fallen and any sense of what we are supposed to be about in this committee. And I don't imagine anything I have to say is going to change that, but I do think every now and then the country needs to be reminded that there is nothing okay about this. There's nothing right about this. There's nothing normal about this. We need to get back to demonstrating some devotion to our constituents and the rule of law. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized. Will the gentleman yield for a second? Yeah, I just want to point out, we're not seeking a videotape. We're seeking the audio tapes to correct the statement from the gentleman from California. And the Democrats, I believe, held the Attorney General of the United States in contempt a couple Congresses ago when they held Bill Barr in contempt. I yield back to the gentleman from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, we got to get focused here. The